Hey YouTube, in this video we're going to be talking about the importance of buying the correct spikes for sprinting. So I have two spikes in front of me. So you have this one, this is an actual sprint spike. And you have this one, my first spikes. These are for middle distance. So before we actually take a look at the sprint spikes, let's look at the middle distance spikes first. So as you can see, these spikes are extremely breathable from the material alone. It's really easy to move them around. You turn over the spike, you can see, that looks like 5. There's 5 spikes. They are a bit blunt, but I don't wear them anyway, so it doesn't matter. Quite blunt. 5 spikes. They have a heel on the back. These shoes are oversized. That's worth knowing. These should be like size 11s. UK. Yep, size 11, and I'm 9.5, which obviously isn't exactly the best. Now let's actually look at the sprint spikes. So this should be 8. Got 8 spikes. The shoes, I don't even know what to say about the shoe here. Bottom part, don't have a heel, obviously quite important. The shoe isn't very breathable, but this is just how sprint spikes are, which I'm going to get into the reason why later. Now let's actually compare the spikes side by side. So first of all, let's start off by looking at the spikes. So you got 5 and 8. The reason why this is important is because the more, well, up to a certain point obviously, but the more spikes a sprint spike has, the harder it is for you to slip whilst you're sprinting. And this is extremely important, especially when you're coming out of the blocks, because that's the point when you're most likely to end up slipping, because the just projection angles are quite off. And when you consider how much faster you're going when you're sprinting compared to how you would be if you was running an 800, 1500 meter, for example, not slipping whilst you're sprinting is extremely important, because you want to make sure that you get a full range of motion and your foot essentially goes from this position all the way up into this position and it cycles back. And if you was to have this shoe, what can end up happening is you go and then like around here, your foot just essentially leaves the ground because you just kind of slip on the ground. Luckily, that's never happened to me whilst I was wearing the shoe, but there is a chance for that to happen. And then your stride length is shortened just because of the shoe alone. The next big difference is the heel. As you can see, this shoe doesn't have a heel, but this one does. When you're sprinting, obviously you don't want to sprint on your heel, but you are going to land almost as if you are on your heel. So you would just land in essentially the position this shoe's in. But if you was to land like this when you were sprinting, there's a good chance your heel or the heel of the shoe is going to land on the floor, and that's going to make a braking force, because there's literally like this much space between your foot and the ground when you're sprinting, which is why the shoe has to be not just light but as tiny as possible, which is why there's no heel. There's obviously 2 reasons for the trying to be light, and so your heel doesn't make a braking force on the ground, compared to this, which has no heel. It just has some stuff on the bottom here so that your foot doesn't hurt when you're walking in the shoe, because obviously it's still a shoe. You're not only going to be sprinting in the shoe, you're going to be walking during your sets and before you're trying to set up and stuff, because under this is just normal kind of rubbery material, and that's not really going to be doing anything to protect your foot from the floor. So making sure that you have something like this, which kind of acts like a heel that won't make you land on the floor, is important. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is the breathability of the shoe. The reason why most sprint shoes aren't quite breathable is because the more breathable a shoe is, the more a shoe looks like this, because this shoe is cloth compared to this, which I don't even know, this probably plastic. And the more breathable a shoe is, the more easy it is for you to move around in the shoe. What ends up happening is the energy you produce is dispersed. Obviously, like, you're not sweating in the shoe or anything like that, but the energy is dispersed. It's not a huge amount, but it does add up. And obviously, as a sprinter, you want to produce as much force as possible, and having your energy dispersed because of breathability isn't really a good thing. So like most sprinters, we would buy sprint shoes over middle distance or long distance shoes, because whilst breathability is cool, sprinting faster is a lot more important in our books. Now, the next difference between the shoes is I'm not even sure if other sprint shoes do this. I'm obviously from looking at them, it does look like they do as well, but it's kind of like there's levels to the shoe. You've got the flat, the shoe when it's just flat like this, like if you're just walking, for example, and then you just got this where the like your foot just goes up, like as if you're wearing heels. For example, look, I'm just pushing down. You can't see it, but I'm just pushing down onto the front of the shoe right now, and the shoe's lifted up. If I was to let go, the shoe goes down. It's kind of like a second gear essentially. It'd be really ideal to think of it like you're like as if you're wearing high heels, but there is no heel at the back essentially. By doing that, obviously makes it easier for you to run on your midfoot and not land on your heels. And when you're dorsiflexing, you kind of just balance out anyway, so that's not too big of a problem. But I just thought that it was quite interesting to realize, because when you're sprinting, you're gonna have your foot dorsiflexed, and then like last second you're gonna land down, and it kind of trains your foot to land with the midfoot first instead of the heel, whilst your heel is going to end up collapsing downwards and you are going to have to come up and go back. Obviously, by having your shoe designed in a position like this is much smarter than having the shoe like this, which increases the chances of you landing with your heels and the rest of your foot all at once, as if you were just walking. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the shoe size. The reason why I even bought this shoe was because at the time I was doing 800 meters, and obviously 800 and 400 aren't that far apart. So I was like, in my head, it can't be that bad to get two different, well, the wrong shoe, because it would just be fine. But the size wasn't there, so I ended up getting two sizes too big. So my foot was just flapping about. And for other shoes, getting shoe sizes, like just normal shoes, getting a size too big isn't that big of a problem. In fact, I have shoes behind me that are like one size too big. But for spikes, it's extremely important that the shoe size is correct, and even more for sprint spikes, that it's essentially as tight as possible, because you want to think of it like this. Imagine if your feet had literal spikes coming out of them right at the front, and that was it. You'd be able to sprint much faster if that was the case than if you was wearing these shoes. And these shoes are supposed to just replicate that, because I don't know if other people do, but I found that as long as I don't slip, I'm able to sprint much faster barefoot than I am wearing shoes. Obviously not timed or anything like that, but I do feel much faster, and the shoes are supposed to replicate that. So having them as tight as possible, almost to the point where they're not even, you don't even, like, obviously you've noticed they're on because these aren't very breathable, but it's kind of like the shoe is just there just to support your foot, and your foot is just supposed to do the rest of the work, compared to having shoes like this, where that's not the case, because the tighter the shoe is, essentially what ends up happening is the spikes line up with your midfoot and your toes. So obviously your toes are going to be here and your midfoot's going to be here. But what ends up happening if your shoe is too big is your toes are right here in the middle, then your midfoot is somewhere like here, maybe even lower down. God forbid is any lower down than there. And obviously what's going to end up happening is you're going to land on the ground with your toe. And if your toe is landing here, right here, what's going to end up happening is your shoe is going to have to still dig into the ground, because obviously the whole shoe's moving with your foot, which is going to end up increasing your ground contact time, and you're going to end up essentially moving your foot either forwards into the shoe, or you're going to have to position your foot in the shoe before you even race, in a way where your foot is already at the front, so that there's flapping space at the back, so you're able to sprint properly. And the ground contact time is the biggest thing, but also that's a great way to disperse energy if you ever needed to do this. And obviously we don't want to disperse energy because that's less power that we can produce. And having a problem where your foot is moving in the shoe with every single step, obviously not ideal, because the only way you can really combat that is by tying the laces even tighter. But you tie the laces even tighter, but your foot still doesn't get in the entirety of the shoe. So the only thing that's happening now is your foot's in the shoe and it's not moving, but your shoe is still going to have to go through the same full range of motion it would normally go through if your foot was the same size as the shoe that you're wearing is. So these are 9s. If I was size 8, not that big of a problem, but if I was size 7, this would add up, because doesn't regardless of what shoe size you are, your foot is still going to move at the same speed. But if your shoe is bigger, your foot can't really keep up with your foot movements because the entire foot isn't in there. It's kind of similar to like going to the gym and doing something with good form compared to doing it with bad form. If you do it with bad form, obviously it could be done better and a lot of energy is being dispersed, but the weight's still moving. But if you do it with good form, you barely break a sweat, barely tired at all, and you can obviously go for a couple more before you get tired. Obviously with good form, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna be, body's gonna be used to it. Once it does get used to it, you're gonna be doing much more than if you was doing it with bad form to begin with. Which is why it's extremely important that your shoes are the correct size and you don't buy one that's too big. I'm not too sure about too small. Obviously, I wouldn't really know how you'd even fit in the shoes, because especially these, they just don't really move. They just don't move on your foot. You put your foot in and you're struggling to even move your toes. So I don't know how you're going to be able to get a shoe size too small. If you did order a shoe size too small and the shoe hasn't come yet, I recommend just sending that back and getting a different shoe that actually is your size, because it's much better to get a shoe that fits you than trying to get a shoe that you see everyone else is getting, like Nike Max Flies. Just because everyone else gets it, it can remove like 0.2 seconds off your personal best, because you have to remember the shoe does not make you, you make you. Like if you're running, let's use my official 100-meter PB for this. If you're running 100 meters in 12.2, which by the way I did in these shoes, and because of all the stuff I just said, could have gone faster. But if you're running 100 meters in 12.2 and then you go by Nike Max Flies, something similar, expected to take off 0.2 seconds off your sprint time, and then you're able to sprint 11.9, you have to remember that realistically you're actually a 12.1 second 100-meter sprinter. The only difference is now the shoe had just made it so you're able to seem like you're faster than you really are. In my opinion, don't get these not really overpriced, because they're quite accurately priced for what they're actually able to do. But don't buy these expensive sprint shoes that will be able to that promise to take off a certain amount of time off your time, because they probably will. But the problem is, if you're not fast enough for it to really matter, don't bother. Like if you are still an 11-second sprinter, there's not much point in you buying the shoes. If you're trying to break 11 seconds, I'd still say, like, I don't care if you're like 11.1, still don't buy the shoes. Reason being is, if you have to use the shoes to break this barrier, then there's a good chance that once you've broken this barrier, so let's say it really does take a 0.2 seconds off your time. Once you've broken this barrier, now you're able to sprint 100 meters in 10.9. You're not really going to improve much. So you bought the shoes, you've essentially paid to win, but how are you going to improve further now? You're not, because you've essentially reached your limit, because you were focusing more on the shoe than you were on your abilities. Obviously, the shoes do play an important role, but it's important to understand why these shoes exist in the first place. And these shoes are just really here just to make sure that you don't slip. Anything else they are able to give you, that's an added bonus. Making sure that you get shoes that have good spikes. Make sure if your spikes are wearing down, you buy new ones. The actual spike, not the entire shoe. making sure that the shoe does its job correctly, which is literally just to make sure you don't slip, is the most important thing. Unless you're sprinting sub 10 seconds, there isn't much point in getting these super shoes. Or I can give you this, unless you're like 10.1 and the shoe can bring you down to 9.9. In that case, fine. Obviously, that's a opportunity where not only is it worthwhile getting the shoe, but your form is probably good enough, and you probably already understand the importance of working on your form, so you won't cap out at 9.9. God forbid if you do. Though if you did and it was just because you just bought the shoe and stopped there, obviously there's not much else we can help. I can't really help you there. But making sure that you just get the correct shoe, you just want it to fit certain criteria. It fits your foot perfectly. Maybe it's a bit tight here, but that's fine. Let's break the shoe in, hope for the best. It has the right amount of spikes. It's the correct shoe for the job. No heel. Not really breathable, but like I said before, the more power you deal, like who cares if your foot's swaying, as long as you're able to put a lot of force into the ground. And that's about it. There isn't really much else to the shoe. There's some extra benefits that you might be able to get from other shoes, like I said, the decreased times in total. But especially if you're slow, don't buy these overpriced shoes, and make sure that your shoes are the correct shoes for the job. They do fit properly and they have the right amount of spikes. Like, just let's just think about it for a sec. If you really do buy like Nike Max Flies, for example, but your personal best doesn't even have an 11 at the front, that you have bigger problems than buying shoes. So as long as the shoes fit and they can get the job done and you haven't slipped once in the shoe, there's nothing else to really focus on. If you like the video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.